let's say we're in the epistolary novel genre. It's a kind of genre where uh, characters exchange letters with each other, and the entire story is told through the letters. So in that novel, uh, a middle-aged woman is exchanging letters with her old high school or college crush, with a man who she was in love with a long time ago, and somehow he reappeared at her horizon, and they decided to write to each other. And they keep writing to each other, and they both turn out to be either divorced or single still. And they're both humorous and fun and smart and experienced. So they decide they like each other and decide to meet. They find this neutral ground, a safe spot where they could get together, maybe some hotel. They decide to meet in the hotel lobby. She drives to meet him, and finally she is there. And she goes to the place that they agreed they would meet, and she sees the man who greets her, and all of a sudden she realizes that that's not the guy she knew. That it's a total stranger. She was exchanging those letters with a perfect stranger who pretended to be somebody from her past. But he continues to insist that he is that man that she was in love with. And then we are in a strange situation. Is she crazy? Because from the earlier emails, we could understand that she has some history of emotional problems. Or is he a sociopath who wants to take advantage of her in some way? She's rich. Did he have anything to do with her husband's death? Or is he the detective who wants to prove that she killed her husband and inherited her fortune that way? So that would be the kind of situation when the letters that we, the readers, read leave us no way of knowing that the person she is corresponding with is not who he pretends to be, and somebody else entirely. From the letters, the readers would assume that that part of the story that they used to know each other is true. But when they look back, when it's revealed that it's some imposter person, somebody who pretends to be the person she used to know, we begin to realize that probably he's just a clever social engineer, somebody who faked knowing all those facts, but in fact cleverly pulled all that information out of her by speaking in generic terms. And as soon as she starts saying something specific, he tries to bit by bit get that information out of her, and then pretends like he knew it all along. So that's the kind of story where the I wanted to use that as the illustration of how a false premise can be established in the minds of the audience from the very beginning in such a way that the audience cannot possibly imagine that the false premise is false, is not true, because we just do not provide the frame of reference for the audience to be able to understand that it was false. However, it turns out that it was false, and when we look back, the audience can already interpret the clues differently. That's the cool way of showing the way false premise and the disproof works. So that was the example that I wanted to use to further illustrate how in some situations the audience may not even be able to have enough information to interpret, to recognize that what we're establishing is a false premise. They have no way of knowing what they do not know. They did not know that the person who is exchanging emails with our protagonist was pretending to be somebody who he is not. They had no way of knowing that this would be important in some way. So they just assumed, because they had to, have some kind of frame of reference, they assumed that a certain information is truthful, and only later it's revealed to be false. I would say that probably movies like The Sixth Sense are based on a very similar technique. When there is no frame of reference, and the audience, just for the sake of clarity of the story, would have to make certain assumptions. We lead them to those assumptions, and then we reveal those preliminary fundamental assumptions to be false. And that's how a lot of those false premises work.
But does it clearly, when we go back to the beginning of the story, like reading it again or watching it again, it makes it very clear? Is it clear that it was a false premise? Like, I have to watch that again and see the clues. Yeah, the clues were there, but we didn't know. We just filled in the blank as the audience, because that's what the writer wanted. We filled in the blanks as the ignoring, or very naively, we fall into the trap.
Exactly,
Yes.
that's exactly the way it works. So the whole beauty of, for example, the story that I just demonstrated to you, is that all the clues are there, and we, as well as the protagonist, entirely miss them. So, for example, they exchange some information, and she writes to him, "So, do you remember this guy, Nick?" And he goes, "Oh, Nick, of course I remember, such a cool guy." And she goes, "Well, I wouldn't call him cool, he was total nerd." I was like, and he goes, "I meant not, of course, he was the nerdiest person I've ever met." And now he already knows that Nick was a nerd, and we didn't even notice that he was pulling that information out of her, that he was cleverly pretending. We thought it was a joke, he was kidding that Nick was cool. But in reality, he had no idea that such a person as Nick even existed. But now that he knows, he already is able to do that. So we can deceive the audience in the same way as that social engineer guy deceived the protagonist. And then when the audience looks back at the story, she can connect to the protagonist being deceived because of how cleverly social engineer deceived them. If they are deceived, of course, she is also deceived. And then the moment when he appears, the stranger, the complete stranger, and the woman begins to guess if she's crazy or she's actually absolutely right in her expecting that he is not who he says he is, even though he insists he is the same guy she used to be in love with, continues to play mind games with her. The moment he appears, it already is an illustration of how a plot twist has this forward power. It immediately motivates the audience, the readers, to find out more about what will happen in the future, because it has this little future moment or future vector embedded in the very plot twist device. So plot twists are fantastic, not only as a backward-facing technique, but also forward-facing technique.
For example, this letter interchange, this letter change with the two protagonists. We see, well, from the point of view of the girl, it occurs what in the first quarter of the story. So the reveal.
I would go about the first act, probably the first quarter of the story, or maybe even the first half of the story. It depends on how well we need to embed the information and how much information we need to write. So during that letter exchange, we also can cleverly set up additional information that we need the audience to know about her. We need to, for example, set up that she is a recently widowed person, and that she used to be married to a rich industrialist, and she inherited from him everything that he owned. So now she has hundreds of millions of dollars.
Okay.
And so and we casually mention it in the exchange, but now we have the possible motive for the bad guy, why he would want to play with her mind, because he would want to somehow manipulate her into maybe giving him all this money. Or maybe it so happens that, and we don't know that either, maybe it's cleverly planted next plot twist when we realize that that person is actually a private detective, or maybe even a police detective, who uses these techniques in order to pull the information out of her and expose her as somebody who poisoned her husband or organized his death in some way so that she could inherit the fortune. And by the end, we have another plot twist when we realize that she is the bad guy all along, and he, the guy who was playing with her mind, is a good guy. He's on the side of law. So there are the interesting possibilities in that kind of story. Because
Like
once we
that would be like what was the name of the plot twist at the end? Anagnosis?
twist ending, twist
That
ending.
one. Twist ending, yes. The Shyamalan
Exactly.
type. The Shyamalan
Yeah,
type.
and like in many mystery stories, we expected the ending. It's part of the genre, the ending to be unpredictable.
Yes.
So that's quite within the genre to do that. But obviously, the audience would probably not guess that the woman
At
in the
all.
terrier,
Yes.
one that we emphasize with, is actually the murderer, and the other guy, the manipulator, the psychopath guy, is the bad guy. So it has a good. I should probably write this. It has good potential.
Yeah.
Um,
The best. Some of
it's
the best stories are born in the most unusual circumstances.
exactly, and the plot twists are cool because once you created the first plot twist or first couple of plot twists in a story, you would not be able to stop. Plot twists require more plot twists. If there is a first couple of plot twists in a story, they may dictate that there is another plot twist down the road, and you can already predict what kind of plot twist you're going to put there, and that makes composing the stories that are based in plot twists a little easier and more fun for the writer as well. Because if the audience finds it fun to read something unpredictable, well, writers find it fun to write something like that as well. It's fun to keep stacking those plot twists one after another. Hmm. So we could probably go over some examples of already familiar plot twists, and maybe I'll be able to come up with something in the spur of the moment